I always avoided direct conflicts, trying not to let them reach the stage of a fight. I used to settle disagreements with words because it seemed to me to be the only right solution. However, my opinion changed when Jeffrey Fletcher, a professional boxer, tried to take my wife away from me. It made me lose my temper. My name is David Klein, and I want to share a story that resembles the plot of an unexpected thriller. Previously, I thought my life was more like a peaceful affair. I grew up in a fairly affluent family, which provided me with many opportunities, including a quality education at Brown University. This stage in my life taught me the value of knowledge, perseverance, and friendship. After university, I was able to build a dream career, and now I earn enough to fulfill my every desire. I had a luxurious house and a 2021 Audi. Not prone to waste, I preferred a modest life to avoid unnecessary attention. My father, who went through a difficult childhood, taught me this principle. However, that all changed when Kelly came into my life. She appeared like a whirlwind and colored my existence with bright colors. 3 weeks after meeting her, I proposed to her and introduced her to my parents. My father was not thrilled, to say the least. He thought I was in a hurry and risked getting burned. But I always assured him that as an adult and reasonable person, I could make my own decisions. Eventually, he backed down and let us get married. Kelly was always a provocative woman. After the wedding, my expenses increased significantly. The amount I normally spent in a month was now gone in a week. Nevertheless, this did not cause me any concern. Kelly enriched my life with passionate moments, raised my social status, and generally made me feel comfortable. Our marriage seemed perfect until the night everything changed. Returning home from a contemporary art show where I had purchased a couple of wonderful paintings for our collection, I noticed an unusual sight. A black BMW was parked next to the house. As I drove by, I saw what appeared to be my wife sitting inside. Intrigued, I walked closer and saw a scene that shattered my idyllic world. Kelly was making out with a muscular guy I later recognized as Jeffrey Fletcher, a professional boxer. Fury and disbelief swept over me. They didn't even notice me approaching. I opened the door on my wife's side and faced them. "Kelly, what does this mean?" My voice shook with excitement. They pulled away from each other. Kelly, unable to find the words, silently turned away from me. Jeffrey got out of the car and stood in front of me. "Leave her alone." His voice sounded threatening. I tried to respond in the same way, but my attempt to sound threatening failed. In response, Jeffrey threw a punch. I steadied myself and wanted to retaliate, but I realized the absurdity of the situation. It was reckless to fight a professional boxer with my bare hands. He threw a second punch, from which I could not resist, and fell to the ground. Pain and confusion overwhelmed me. As I tried to get up, Kelly walked over to me, turned away, and held out an envelope. "These are the divorce papers, David. You have 2 days to sign or you'll be worse off." Her words sounded cold and merciless. "Yeah, we'll be waiting, buddy, and if you tell anyone, you'll only have yourself to blame for your death," the muscular guy said. Together with my wife, they got in the car and drove off into the night. I continued to lie on the ground, blood pouring from my nose. I was confused, not understanding how this could have happened, and worse, why it had happened to me in the first place. It was hard to accept that someone had struck me so easily. After a few minutes, I found the strength to get up and walked into the house. To my surprise, everything in the house was in its place. I tried to remember the slightest sign of betrayal, but nothing came to mind. Kelly wasn't working. She spent her time at the gym, getting massages, playing tennis, swimming, and hanging out with friends a lot. I realized I was in serious trouble, but I wasn't going to give up. The first thing I did was call Anthony, my childhood friend. My voice shook as I began to speak. "Anthony, I need your help. Can you come over?" "Sure, David. I'll be at your place in half an hour," he replied, and I was relieved knowing I wouldn't be alone with this problem. While my friend was on his way, I started looking around the house. I'd realized that of all the valuables Kelly had taken, only her ID had been taken. Everything else was still in place. I also checked the safe. Kelly didn't know the combination, but I decided to make sure it was intact just in case. When Anthony arrived, I saw genuine concern in his eyes. We sat down in the living room, and I began to tell him everything that had happened 40 minutes ago. It was hard to enunciate every word, but I felt I needed to get it out. I came home from the exhibition and saw them together in his car. They were kissing, Anthony. I could barely contain my emotions, and then he beat me up, and Kelly, she just handed me the divorce papers. Anthony listened intently, his face growing more and more serious. "David, this is crazy. That rascal needs to be punished," he said firmly. I replied, "I know, but how? I don't want to go to the police." "The first thing to do is to protect yourself and your interests," he said. "Change the locks, lock joint accounts, and consult a good lawyer. Maybe we should hire a private investigator to find out what's really going on between her and this boxer. I think if a private investigator can gather enough evidence, your wife could be charged with adultery and you'd be in a much stronger position," Anthony suggested. I nodded in agreement. Anthony was right. It was time to secure myself. It was about 7 in the evening. I immediately called my most trusted attorney and told him everything that had happened. "We need to bring down these scoundrels who wanted to go against me," I said, and his answer was reassuring. But first of all, I needed proof. Because of my wife's infidelity, I knew she was probably with her bodybuilder now. I pondered and asked the lawyer for the number of the best private investigator I could hire for the job. But you must realize that time is short and there is still a lot of work to be done. Before the detective could finish his sentence, I told him I would double his fee. "I'll get started," he replied, and I relaxed a little. It was getting late, so I decided to tackle the blocking of accounts tomorrow. And tonight I needed a moral rest. I was in real wild mourning. First, I called the banks and blocked all joint accounts and cards that Kelly used that belonged to me. Luckily, following my dad's advice, I was the one who handled all of our finances. I then changed the locks on our shared house and installed an alarm system so that security could come if needed. I also called in a 4-man crew who took a couple hours to pack up all of Kelly's belongings and place them in large black bags outside. I managed to get all the necessary things done in half a day. Toward evening, I headed over to Anthony's house as I didn't want to be home alone. Anthony's house became my temporary refuge, a place where I could take my mind off my problems for a moment. Anthony and I were discussing our next steps when my phone suddenly rang. The screen showed Kelly's number. I hesitated before answering it. Anthony nodded, motioning for me to pick up. I pressed the answer button and Kelly's voice filled the quiet room. "David, have you lost your mind? Why can't I get into the house? What's wrong with our accounts?" Her voice sounded angry and harsh. I sighed, trying to stay calm. "Kelly, after everything that happened, I couldn't just stand idly by. The bills were mine. After all, I'm the one making the money." I said, "You want a war? Then you'll have it. I'll make you regret it," she said. Her threats were so vehement that Anthony couldn't contain his laughter. "Kelly, let's discuss this calmly. I really want to understand what happened between us." I tried to de-escalate the situation, but she replied, "No, David, you've already made your choice. Let's see how you handle it. I expect the paperwork tomorrow by 6:00 p.m. She hung up, leaving me in utter amazement. I felt sick, for she refused to talk and opted for aggressive behavior, as if I was the one who had ruined her life. 10 minutes later, a message arrived on my phone from a private detective. He sent the first clues gathered over the past day. Included were videos of my wife and a muscular guy in a car and over 15 photos of them kissing, hugging, and acting like a real couple. It was a shocking result. I was surprised that they were showing off their relationship so openly. I couldn't resist and sent the pictures to Kelly. "Still don't want to have a normal conversation," was the caption to them. Literally minutes later, Kelly called me again. This conversation was the real test. "You think you can blackmail me and get away with it?" Her voice sounded venomous. Tension instantly gripped me. "Kelly, I don't want hostility. I just want to talk and figure out what our problem is," I tried to explain. But she interrupted me. "You blocked my cards and changed the locks. What about me? You're a real rat, spying on me. You're despicable and pathetic." Her voice rose like a wave of anger, ready to sweep away everything in its path. What was I supposed to do when you six your huge thug on me? I didn't want this to turn into a confrontation. I tried to stay calm, but my heart was racing. A confrontation? David, you haven't seen a real confrontation yet. If you don't sign these papers and give me back access to the accounts and the house, I promise you'll regret it. She paused for a moment. You're a weakling, not a man. If you can't stand up for your wife, you can't even fight. What kind of protector are you? I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to gather my thoughts. Kelly, I'm recording this conversation. All of your threats will be forwarded to my attorney, I said, trying to sound confident. After a moment of silence, a stern male voice said, "Tomorrow at 6. I slowly hung up the phone, feeling the weight of this conversation on my shoulders. Anthony, who had listened to the whole argument, silently walked over to me and put his hand on my shoulder. "I'm shocked. Man, where did you find a snake like that?" he said, and we both laughed, though the laughter was far from our thoughts. I sent the recording of the conversation and the pictures the private investigator had sent me to my lawyer. He said it was excellent material. Unable to resist, I took a drink of whiskey, though I had never had a drink before. I began to think about what I would do tomorrow and how to behave during the meeting. I was sure I would not sign the papers and would file for divorce separately. My attorney advised me not to go to the meeting, but to file for divorce in court immediately based on the evidence. However, I was resentful and wanted revenge. After talking to Kelly, I realized that the game was just beginning. The next morning, I received a text message with the exact address. It was some remote desert area, which didn't suit me, so I offered to meet at my house instead. I received an agreement. I arrived at the place in advance, accompanied by 3 professional bodyguards that Anthony had found. They were large men wearing masks. I realized that my physical condition did not inspire fear, but 3 healthy men would surely intimidate a boxer. We entered the house. The bodyguards hid in different corners. I turned off the alarm and waited for Jeffrey and my wife. When Jeffrey arrived, I saw him enter the house cautiously, as if he was expecting some kind of trick. He wasn't alone. 2 of his friends were standing outside. I was at the other end of the living room. As he started to approach me, I shouted, "Stop, let's keep our distance from each other." "David, what's wrong? Are you afraid of something?" he asked as he continued to approach. "I just want to talk to you, Jeffrey, honestly and openly, about Kelly, about you, and about what's going to happen next. By the way, where's Kelly?" I replied. "Kelly, man, she doesn't want to see you after what you did. You acted like a real rat. And what's one supposed to do with rats?" he asked me. "You should know better. I'm not the one with the rat tail," I parried, and he clearly didn't like my answer. His big head couldn't handle the meaning of my words. He started to say that life had taught me nothing, and shouted something to his guys who had entered the house. I realized the situation was heating up, but we can part peacefully and forget each other if you give me the signed divorce papers and the original pictures you sent Kelly yesterday, he said. "Yeah, no problem." I leaned over and slid him a folder of papers on the floor. He picked it up, but on the divorce paper, in large letters across the page, was the word loser. "You rascal," he said, and approached me confidently. I had already signaled, and 3 of my bodyguards appeared in the room from different directions. "Did you think I was alone?" I said to him, and ordered my bodyguards to teach those rascals a lesson properly. I didn't care about those 2 guys. I wanted Jeffrey to get what he deserved. Turns out he was a lot more cowardly because he was the first to put a rat tail up and beg to be left alone. But that didn't help him. One of my bodyguards was holding Jeffrey, and in the meantime I walked over to him. "That's for daring to raise your hand at me." I punched him right in the face. "That's for hitting me a second time when I wasn't showing any aggression towards you." I hit him a second time. "That's for kissing my wife." "That's for sleeping with my wife." "That's for breaking into my house." I continued to beat him. He begged me to stop, but I felt no pity for him. Anger and resentment boiled inside me, built up over these few days. I stopped and ordered the 3 men to be loaded into a car and driven away. The drive to my house was empty. I grabbed a mop and wiped the floor clean of any signs of a fight, locked the door, and drove to my lawyer's office. I filed for divorce, attaching all the evidence of my wife's infidelity, including photographs, videotapes, and voice recordings. I was determined not to back down and see it through. That evening, Kelly called me. Her voice became calmer, wanting to have a normal conversation. I hung up, not wanting to talk trash, and texted her that she had 2 days to get her stuff completely out of the house, or it would end up in the trash. 2 days later, I learned that Jeffrey ended up in the hospital. His condition was bad. Injuries to his arms and legs. It looked like he had fallen off his bike at high speed down a hill. That's exactly what happened. I decided to visit him at the hospital to see how he was feeling. When I entered his room, he flinched in fear. "Don't be afraid, I'm not going to finish you off," I said calmly. "Then what do you want?" he asked. "I just came to make sure our conflict is resolved." "Peace," I replied, mocking his powerlessness as both of his arms were in a cast. It was obvious he was full of anger, but because of his injuries and stupid behavior, he couldn't do anything against me. These injuries cut off his path to professional boxing, effectively ending his career. Recovery would require years of hard work, and even then success was not guaranteed. "It was your choice and I don't judge you. At least I didn't turn you into the police, though I could have done that a long time ago," I said. "Peace," he replied, and I shook his plaster-covered hand. "If I find out you're communicating with Kelly in any way, you won't be lying in a hospital bed, but in a wooden crate underground. Maybe not even a box," I said, and he nodded in agreement. I left the hospital and headed for my house, which I planned to sell. All my belongings had already been taken out, and now all that was left was to wait for the outcome of the trial. I was confident of my victory and didn't doubt it for a second. Kelly kept trying to contact me, but I decided not to communicate with her or interact in any way. This person no longer existed for me. I was indifferent to her understanding, her motives, and her actions. She only started a relationship with me for money, and I was blind. She found a new boyfriend because I was never interesting to her. She thought she could divorce me and take more than half of my assets, hoping I would let her off easy and give up what I had earned over the years. Remembering her threats and bold betrayal outside our home, it's clear who she really is. That's why I even obtained a court order banning Kelly from coming near me, as her threats were direct evidence that she could hurt me. I didn't know what to expect from her. 2 months later, we were officially divorced. Kelly was charged with adultery, endangering my health, and fraud. As a result, she had to pay me restitution. Since the house was bought before we were married, she did not own it. However, the car I gave her for our wedding anniversary had to be sold. The proceeds were divided in half. She spent part of it on her attorney and my compensation. As a result of all this, Kelly was left with nothing. She expected to get everything out of our marriage, but if she had been a little smarter, maybe she could have succeeded. Instead, she only put herself down and demonstrated her level of intelligence. Kelly had to move back to her parents' farm when she was left with nothing. I, in turn, acquired new property, started exercising to become more physically fit, and endured an entire lecture from my father who did nothing but repeat the same phrase I'd already told you. So that's the end of the story. Leave your opinion in the comments below this story. We will read your feedback with interest. Also, don't forget to put a like and subscribe to our channel. This will allow you not to miss new, no less interesting and exciting stories. We wish you good luck.
Thank you so much for watching my video and your time. Please subscribe to my channel and click on the bell button. Also, I am very interested to know your personal opinion about this story. You can write it in the comments. I will definitely answer you personally.